Imagine approaching the most powerful healer in history, begging for help only to be told that you don't qualify. Worse yet, the response seems to compare you to a household pet. Would you persist, or would you walk away in frustration? That's exactly what happened in Matthew chapter 15, verses 27 to 28, when a Canaanite woman encountered Jesus. But instead of offense, she responded with relentless faith and received a miraculous blessing that shook the foundations of religious assumptions. What did Jesus mean? Was he rejecting her, testing her, or revealing something deeper about salvation? What if I told you this passage holds the key to understanding God's mercy, the nature of faith, and how we too can receive divine breakthrough? Let's break it down by looking at the fundamental truths. A desperate woman, an unexpected answer. Jesus had just left a confrontation with the Pharisees over what truly defiles a person, as described in Matthew chapter 15, verses 1 to 20. Instead of staying in Jewish territory, he withdrew to Tyre and Sidon, Gentile regions. Here, a Canaanite woman approached him, pleading for her daughter's healing. "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." Matthew chapter 15, verse 22, ESV. At first, Jesus ignored her. The disciples even asked him to send her away. Then he responded with what seemed like rejection. "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Matthew chapter 15, verse 24, ESV. She refused to back down, kneeling before him and saying simply, "Lord, help me." Jesus then spoke what might seem to be a harsh statement. "It is not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs." Matthew chapter 15, verse 26, ESV. But the woman replied with unexpected wisdom and faith, "Yes, Lord, yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Matthew chapter 15, verse 27, ESV. Jesus then did something incredible. "O woman, great is your faith. Be it done for you as you desire." Matthew chapter 15, verse 28, ESV. Her daughter was healed instantly. But what just happened? Why did Jesus first seem reluctant and then reward her faith? The shocking language of dogs. In Jewish tradition, Gentiles were often referred to as dogs, as seen in Psalm 22, verses 16 and 20. However, Jesus used the Greek word kunarion, meaning little dogs, a term for household pets rather than street scavengers. This wasn't a racial slur, it was a parable. Jesus was using a metaphor to test her faith and understanding of grace. Law versus faith. Jesus' earthly ministry was primarily to Israel, as noted in Matthew chapter 10, verses 5 to 6, fulfilling the covenant promises to Abraham. However, the Abrahamic covenant always included a blessing for the nations, as stated in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3. This encounter foreshadowed the gospel's expansion to Gentiles, as described in Romans chapter 11, verses 17 to 24. Faith over heritage. This passage echoes the centurion's faith from Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 to 13, where another Gentile amazed Jesus by recognizing his authority. It also brings to mind the feeding of the 5,000 in Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21, where even the crumbs of God's provision overflow with abundance. And finally, it contrasts with the Pharisees' legalism in Matthew chapter 15, verses 1 to 20. Highlighting the difference between external religiosity and true, persistent faith. What fundamental truth does this passage reveal about faith? Well, Faith is not about entitlement, but about trusting in God's mercy. The woman calls Jesus Lord, recognizing his divine authority. Unlike many Israelites, she doesn't demand based on lineage, but pleads based on his goodness, as reflected in James chapter 4, verse 6. Jesus praises her great faith, showing that access to God is not about background, but about belief. What does this passage reveal about divine law and justice? Is God playing favorites? No. The law protected Israel as the covenant people, but faith grants access to all, as we see in Romans chapter 3, verses 28 to 30. Israel had first priority, but Gentiles were never excluded, as stated in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6. Jesus does not reject the woman. He tests her understanding of grace. This moment sets the stage for the grafting in of the Gentiles, as mentioned in Romans chapter 11, verses 17 to 20. What does this teach about Jesus' mission? This moment reveals that Jesus' mission extends beyond Israel to the world. His death would break the dividing wall, as mentioned in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 14 to 16. Salvation is no longer about ethnicity, but about faith in him, as stated in John chapter 10, verse 16. Faith is the key to the kingdom. This woman had no legal claim, yet Jesus granted her request based on faith. This affirms salvation by faith, not works or heritage, as described in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 to 9. God's mercy overflows. The crumbs metaphor teaches that even the smallest portion of God's grace is enough. Just like the feeding of the 5,000, God's provision is always more than enough, as seen in Matthew chapter 14, verse 20. The inclusion of the nations. This story foreshadows the Great Commission, as mentioned in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19. Jesus is the bread of life, as stated in John chapter 6, verse 35, available to all who seek him. Jesus, the bread for all. Every passage ultimately points to Christ. Here, we see Jesus fulfilling Israel's mission, as described in Isaiah chapter 42, verse 6. Faith, not lineage, grants access to God's kingdom, as stated in Romans chapter 3, verse 22. This also foreshadows the gospel's spread to the nations, as mentioned in Acts chapter 10, verses 34 and 35. This woman understood what many missed, that God's grace is not limited, and even the smallest portion is powerful enough to transform lives. Living out this truth. 1. Approach God with bold humility. Just like the Canaanite woman, we should be persistent yet reverent in prayer, as stated in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 16. Application. When struggling, don't assume God is silent. Press in with faith. 2. Trust that God's grace is sufficient. The woman knew even a crumb of Jesus' power was enough. Application. Instead of waiting for big miracles, trust that God has already provided what you need, as mentioned in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. Conclusion. Are you willing to settle for crumbs? This story isn't just about a miracle, it's a radical redefinition of access to God. Faith is the key to the kingdom, and even the smallest portion of His grace is enough to transform your life. The question is, are you willing to persist in faith until you receive your breakthrough? If you've gotten any value out of our time together, then smash that like button, and don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.